Thank you so much for joining us today as we offer some education, insight, and hopefully some helpful support to those impacted by the devastating flooding that happened over the weekend in Central Texas. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Mackingall, and I'm the director of the OCD Institute here in Texas, where we specialize in using cognitive behavioral therapy to treat anxiety disorders, which of course also includes trauma. CBT is the most evidence-based intervention for trauma, and we know that it is an intervention that can help individuals not just be able to process the trauma, but be able to get unstuck and live full lives despite experiencing trauma. What we know is that this weekend's flooding will have a lasting impact on families and communities for decades to come, and we are here to support you through it. Today, we're joined by the world-renowned Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a leading expert in trauma response, how we can respond appropriately, and of course, how we help individuals live through, cope, and move through traumatic experiences. We're so excited to have him today on the podcast and to provide insight, education, and support. Thank you so much for joining us, and we're looking forward to providing support today and in the future. We're going to continue these episodes so that we can continue to provide appropriate education at appropriate time points, because what we know is that support tends to and should come in phases, and certain support is what's needed right now, where different support will be what's needed later. OCDI Texas and Dr. Bruce Perry's team are going to work together to make sure we're continuing to provide education and support along the way. Thank you for joining. Welcome everybody to today's webinar. This is a webinar that the three of us are joining with heavy hearts and a hope and a goal that we can provide some support, some education, and some hope during a time that feels so difficult, so challenging, and so confusing for all of us across the country, and especially those of us in Texas. We are joined today by an incredible world-renowned trauma expert and specialist, Dr. Bruce Perry, and a community leader who is also my dad, I almost said doctor, but Jim Mackingall, where we're going to join together to really talk about how can we show up as a community? How can we show up to loved ones, to friends, to families, and of course to those who are directly impacted by this devastation in Central Texas. So I want to start with a couple of introductions, and of course we will hop into just what do we do, where do we start, and how do we make a difference? So first and foremost, I want to introduce a colleague, a good friend, and a mentor, Dr. Bruce Perry. Dr. Perry is a world-renowned psychiatrist and neuroscientist and trauma expert whose groundbreaking work has reshaped how we understand and respond to the impact of trauma on children, families, and communities. He's the principal of Neurosequential Network and senior fellow at the Child Trauma Academy. He formerly served as the chief of psychiatry at Texas Children's Hospital and the vice chair of psychiatry at Baylor College of Medicine. He has over 500 scientific publications, book chapters, and presentations to his name, and has truly devoted his life to helping us understand the lasting imprint of trauma on the developing brain. Dr. Perry is perhaps most widely known to the public through so many of his best-selling books, including The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, Born for Love, and What Happened to You, which he co-authored with Oprah Winfrey. These works have given a voice to the silent suffering of countless children and illuminated a path towards compassion, healing, and post-traumatic growth. Dr. Perry has been called upon time and time again in the wake of tragedy, from school shootings and natural disasters to the traumatic loss of children, to helping guide communities through unimaginable grief. His insights have not only shaped trauma-informed clinical care, but have also provided urgent guidelines for caregivers, educators, first responders, policymakers, and all of us in times of national crisis. Today, as we are all grappling with the devastation of the Central Texas floods and the heartbreaking events at Camp Mystic and within our entire community, we're especially grateful to have Dr. Perry with us. His presence reminds us that in our deepest pain, healing begins with understanding, and that connection, rhythm, and compassion are often the foundations for recovery. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Perry. We could not be happier and more grateful to have you here.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. It's heartbreaking stuff. One of the things, I'm actually so happy to be on this because the sense of helplessness that people feel during these times is something that I've felt. It's like I'm up in, I'm out of the country right now, and my daughters went to Mystic. So just thinking about it, it's like, ugh, it's heartbreaking. I can't even hold in my mind the images of what happened to those children. And I know that I'm not alone in that. There's a lot of people that just can barely tolerate the imagery, the thought of what happened to those children. You know, one of the things that we have been doing over the last, I don't know, 30 years has been trying to figure out how to respond to events like this. And sometimes they're man-made, you know, they're war or they're some other catastrophic event. They're frequently not at this scale, right? I mean, the scale of this devastation is such that there are multiple layers and levels of complexity where we have to think as a community of healers, as a community as a community about what do you do? What do I do with my little slice of experience to try to make this better? And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that because it's the pondering what we should do sometimes is paralyzing, and
Yes.
that leads to the level more of the sense of hopelessness. So what I want to do is help people understand that, listen, at whatever level you are, in whatever way you interact with people who have been impacted by this, you can have a positive effect that really will contribute to healing. So I think that's part of what we should talk about.
100%. And I think our goal for today is exactly that, is how can everybody feel like they know what step to take next, even if it's just putting one foot in front of the other, how they can do that, and also what the community and our response needs to be, not just right now, but in the near future and in the long run, because all of that will make a huge difference on how individuals, family members, and of course our entire community heals. And so next I want to introduce my dad, James Mackingdell, who is next to us on the screen and joining us today. Um, Jim is a Houston icon, entrepreneur, and philanthropist, and is one of the most beloved, iconic leaders in Houston and in Texas. He's the founder of Gallery Furniture and has become nationally recognized not just for his business success, but for his unwavering commitment to helping people in times of crisis. He's more than a businessman, he's a force of good in the world. From sheltering hundreds during Hurricane Harvey to feeding families through snowstorms and now supporting Texas and Texans affected during these devastating floods, Mac's legacy is one of immediate action and unwavering community care. When tragedy strikes, Jim doesn't ask what should be done, he simply does it. Today, he joins to share his perspective on how we as community members can show up for others in moments of grief and uncertainty, and how we can turn purpose, faith, and service into tools for healing. Thanks for joining us, Dad, and would love to hear from you a little bit of just how you always find a way to bring the community together during these times.
Well, the entire state is devastated, not just the hill country, but people are affected in Dallas, San Antonio, Austin, El Paso, Houston, of course, all over the state. It's a tragedy, and every day we get, Dr. Perry, a different story of more horrors that happen. So I'm just here to listen and learn and try to spread the news that healing is possible through the thoughts of people like yourself, Dr. Perry, and Liz. So I'm excited to be here and learn, because we all do feel helpless right now, and we all want to help. The question is how to help. Do we gather supplies to help people rebuild in Central Texas? Do we send money? How do we help all the Houstonians and the thousands of people that are affected by this tragedy? So I'm here to listen and learn. So how do we make things better so people can get through this? I could only imagine the horror of not only the people at Camp Mystic, but all the people that also were drowned by this horrible storm. So we're here to listen and learn, and it's a thrill to have Liz on and Dr. Perry. And for all you Texans out there, I think Dr. Perry is at heart a Texan.
Very true. Very true.
So, Dr. Perry, I'll let you start with just what are the first steps? Like, how does a community start to rebuild? So many people have questions like, what do I say? You know, how do I show up? I'm afraid to say the wrong thing. I'm afraid to do something that'll make it worse. But what is kind of a first response we can do as a community, and what should we be rallying for right now?
Well, let me just start with a tiny little bit of education about the way human beings deal with stress. And I don't want to get too too academic, but one of the things that we know is that the feelings that we have, the anxiety, the despair, all of these things are related to essentially our body responding to something that's atypical. It's outside of sort of what should happen. We all are walking around with an internal expectation about the way the world works. And when all of a sudden things don't work that way and catastrophic, horrific things happen, it challenges us and it makes us feel unsettled and dysregulated and so forth. And now the impact of these kinds of events is going to be very different depending upon how close you were to what we would consider ground zero, right? And what we know is that if you are in sort of the middle of this bullseye at ground zero and you lost a child, or you lost a home, or you watched someone die or drown, the degree of distress you feel is going to be much greater than if you knew somebody who had a kid who went there. Now, that's not to say that that separate kind of disconnected experience is not distressing. It's just that what we've learned is that the closer you are to the event, the more likely you are to have these profound responses that will last over a long period of time. And this echo effect, this sort of the ground zero, then the first responders, and then the people who knew and lived with the individuals in ground zero, if you start to do the numbers and you think about traditional therapeutic work being, oh, we're going to go see a therapist 1 hour a week, they're going to help us with whatever it is that we do. If you have only two people in the middle of this ground zero, two children who witnessed a terrible thing, and then there's 12 people that are kind of in the next circle out who are first responders who loved and lived with the people that died. If you just have two people, what that means is by the time everybody who's been impacted by that it presents with mental health challenges, if you used a traditional 1 hour a week therapy, you would need 22 therapists dedicating 50% of their full week just to meet the needs of that event.
Wow.
So now if you look at the ground zero of this event, we're talking about in excess of 90,000 clinicians that would be required to do 1 hour a week of mental health service to help meet these mental health needs. And so what that tells us right there is that our conventional medical model system isn't going to work. We can't just sort of rely on the traditional mental health system to meet these needs. And so now that's sort of sobering, but the good news is what we have found and what many other people have been seeing over the years is that what really heals people is other people, not necessarily a therapist, right? We heal from these tiny little doses of kindness, of thoughtfulness, of understanding, of listening, of giving a hug, of being present, of bringing a meal. These things provide this relational regulation of these systems in our body that make us feel connected and safe again. And this is what I think is going to happen in Texas. I mean, Texas has got so many great communities and so many people who are capable of being present, attentive, attuned, which basically means, should I say something now or should I not say something? Should I give you a hug? Should I not give you a hug? And Dr. McIngvale, I'm going to call you Dr. McIngvale until you start calling me Bruce, all right? So you brought it up that this being present for other people, I think, is going to be a really important thing. And one of the things that, Mac, you've always done, you have always created context to help people come together. Excuse me. Whether it's in your store or supporting other events, you've done things that help bring people together. This power of proximity is one of the most powerful healing things that can happen. And what we've seen is in the beginning, like when this happens, people are willing to be uncomfortable in proximity with other people who are hurting.
Right.
But over time, it gets a little bit more uncomfortable because, as you said, you don't really know what to say. You don't know, should I bring it up? Should I not bring it up? How do I handle this? And so in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, that's when the people are going to, that are most impacted by this are going to be struggling the most because people feel uncomfortable and a lot of people just flee. They just don't know what to say, or they end up saying something that makes everybody feel uncomfortable. And this is a very challenging situation.
So what are some of the first steps if you are a family member who has potentially, if you're a family member who's lost a loved one directly, what can they do right now for themselves? What would you recommend
Right.
as if you were their clinician?
So the first thing, and we talk, this is part of what this is part of what we're doing right now, is education. Teaching people about what are the normal, absolutely healthy things that will predictably happen when you are in catastrophic trauma. And again, because the unknown and things that we're not used to make us feel really uncomfortable and more distressed, and because humans are very contagious to others, if you feel you like really are really, 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 really worried that they don't bring it up, they don't ever talk about it, or if you're really, really worried that they're not sleeping or that they seem sad or whatever it is that you're worried about, you'll just get more dysregulated, which means that they'll get more dysregulated, which means they'll be less likely to be, it just leads to this very uncomfortable interaction. So the first thing is education. Learn about what are the normal things that happen when people experience traumatic events. And there's a couple ways to do that. We have some materials that we'll make available to you and to people who are listening about just simple steps about how do you talk about death to a child. What's a reasonable way to explain what's happening to their bodies? Normalize the fact that they're going to have trouble with sleep, that things are going to pop into their heads that are going to make them feel really uncomfortable. And the more the adults and others around the people at ground zero and this first layer out, the more they get these relational supports and education, the more likely they are to get back towards a normal level of regulation earlier.
I really loved earlier when you said to us, you said, we should be cautious pathologizing every symptom right now and instead understand that most of the traumatic responses are normal, right? And I think those of us that have done trauma work or we understand trauma work, we know that a true PTSD diagnosis doesn't typically happen until 6 months post a traumatic event because typical trauma responses are expected, right? One of the things you said earlier was it would be abnormal if people weren't experiencing heavy grief, difficulty sleeping, right? Some of these symptoms.
Right. And your body has these incredible protective mechanisms that help keep us alive. And in situations like this, one of the patterns, sort of one of the coping mechanisms that we use all the time is probably going to be very prominent. And we call this dissociation. When your body is everybody's kind of heard of the fight or flight response, right? Like when you really get, angry at somebody and you get agitated and you may say something and you escalate and you externalize. Excuse me. But when you are in an inescapably distressing situation, inescapable pain, inescapable, almost unthinkable horror, we brought it up, right? I can only think about that for like a millisecond before I go, oh, God, I got to do something else. I can't even think about a bunch of little girls in those cabins. I can't think about it. Sorry. So your brain protects you. You dissociate. And so a lot of the individuals who are dealing with this are going to be robotic. They're going to seem, a lot of times people will see them and they will appear to be emotionless. And then that will be misinterpreted. And they'll think, oh, that's abnormal. But that's actually in these times, that kind of physically exhausted, mentally exhausted, withdrawn, disengaged. That's one of the major presentations that people will see.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing that can happen is, and this is where that the dissociation for the people who are most impacted in 3 weeks or 3 months is basically going to allow people who are uncomfortable dealing with this. They'll think, oh, they're fine. They're coping well. And so that's a real danger point with these families, is that the fact that they aren't having these easily observable external symptoms, people kind of go, oh, look at, they're doing fine, they're mowing the lawn, they say hi, they give the normal greetings that you would normally be with a neighbor. But if you could see inside, you would see the tragic sadness and distress and the ruminations and all the kinds of stuff that's going to be what they have to deal with. And so that combination leads to this this unfortunate period at about 3 to 6 months where people kind of get back into their norm, right? Things are getting rebuilt, you know, you have everybody has the inertia of their busy life. And so all of these folks are no longer at the forefront of your mind. And it can be a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks and you realize, oh, I haven't touched base with so-and-so. And a lot of times they feel abandoned, right? And this is why I hope we'll keep doing this kind of thing. You know, we want to, you know, we've talked about this before we went live, but we really would like to be present for people who are dealing with this for the duration, not just a one-shot podcast. They're going to need psychoeducation. And right now, one of the hard things is that the people that are most impacted by this, they can't learn anything right now. They're too overwhelmed. And it's such an odd disconnect because this is when we want to give them the most. Oh, here, read this, do this, we'll do this, we'll have it. They're least capable of benefiting from this stuff now.
Right.
We have all these volunteer people that are going to be there, volunteer therapists, volunteer walk around. In every one of these big disasters, this is what happens. All kinds of supports up front. And then as people get back to their normal lives and people's needs, the people impacted by the trauma, their needs increase, there's all of a sudden these slopes intercept. And there's a point when, you know, the need is completely unmet. And we leave it to the mental health system, which is already overwhelmed, getting in a point.
Everything, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that leads me to my next question of, so what can we do right now for those struggling, for those suffering, for those either with children or with family members? Like, what does showing up right now look like? Because as you said, we're going to do many more of these and we're going to talk about how we show up later when processing can happen. And that's something I've talked a lot about is, you know, my area of expertise, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's really more of anxiety and trauma treatment. We can do that work. Like I specialize in that, but it wouldn't be useful to be doing that right now, right? No one is ready to learn how to deal with trauma, how to do, right? That they're not there yet. And so the needs are very different now than they'll be in 3 or 6 months. So what can we do right now?
So this is where Max magic always sort of comes in. Just knowing that somebody is thinking about you is helpful for people. Knowing that there is some place that they can get something, that there are people that care about them, that there are people that there, whatever it is, different people will have different needs. But that is a reflection in the beginning of what I would consider being present. That's the first thing, is being present. And it doesn't necessarily mean being side by side, physical proximity, but just a text, kind of thinking about you, you know, or signing up for kind of a lot of these families will need meals. A lot of these families will need people literally to help them figure out how to prepare, how to contact a funeral home. these are young families. They haven't done any of this stuff usually. They don't know how to do all people that need can really, in a lot of different ways, if you're present. And so this is the first thing I would recommend, is that everybody kind of sit down and go, all right, I'm going to make a list of who do I know has been impacted by this? Do I have a neighbor? Do I have a relative? Was it my family? And when you kind of make that catalog of how people are impacted, even if, let's say that you are pretty proximal, you're involved in searching and you're involved in recovery, you're involved in that, at some point you want to begin to think about, all right, who's being impacted by this? Is my family? How are they being impacted by the fact that I'm gone all the time doing this and I don't want to talk about it? How are the people that I have talked to impacted, whose children I found? And begin to think about, how can I have a little light touch? I got their phone number. Can I just text them and say, this is a hard time thinking about it. That's it. Light touch. But we heal. This is the thing about, I got to do a little biology thing right here. When you think about the brain, the systems in the brain and the way they change, and all of our physiological systems, they don't change because we activate them for 1 hour a week, right? They change because we activate them in tiny little doses all throughout the week. So if you think about the powerful thing about this is that we don't know the right thing to say. I can guarantee you that you will say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And you're going to rupture, but then you repair. And the very same thing you say on Sunday night, if you say that on Monday morning, that's the right thing. If you say it Sunday night, it's the wrong thing. You say it again on Monday afternoon, it's the wrong thing. Everybody is in a mess right now. And over time, what it is that you're willing to stay there and keep saying,
Yeah.
be present. Once you realize that you blew it, don't flee, just repair. All relationships are about rupture and repair. Rupture and repair. Think about the people that you love the most. How often you say, I didn't mean that. What I meant was, it's all about coming back together. But when people recognize that you're there, that's a huge step. So being present, being attentive, trying to meet the tiny little needs that somebody might have, like, listen, can I get you some coffee? Whatever it is. And again, Mac's been a genius at that, creating environments where people feel they can go to, where they can they can be around people who will be sensitive and caring. The fact that there are that Mac's famous, that there's a famous person, a powerful, famous person in Texas who cares about us. And that means something to people.
So, Dad, I'd love to hear what your call to action would be for obviously yourself, but also other community members and business owners, and what are ways you've shown up in the past that you feel like we can continue to show up. And one thing we learned is it's not about showing up and doing one event, right? It's about continuing to show up and continuing to do those events.
I could learn from Dr. Bruce. I shouldn't call him Dr. Perry. Bruce, about how the communities need to be rebuilt, but more important than bricks and mortar is how do we let people know that we're here for them, even if it just means saying hello or sending them a video, let them know we're caring about them. It's because there's so many people affected by this. And like what Bruce said is, how do we find these people to say, hey, we care about you. If you need anything, give me a call. I know it's hell going through it right now. How do we say that to these thousands of people that are just devastated? The stories go on and on. I heard some story yesterday about they'd sent their child to a different camp. They were vacationing down there on the river, and the entire family's wiped out except for the child. So, how do we how do we reach out and touch these people in a way that's thoughtful and caring, and just like you said, Bruce, how do we stay with them from now till they face Christmas Day without their loved ones?
I mean, that part is the biggest challenge that we've, as a field, I think that we've learned a lot about kind of the acute response and how to kind of come in and do, you know, early intervention stuff. But we've failed miserably at what you just talked about, Mac, at staying with families and helping them get through the waxing and waning of distress. And we just have to get better. The good news is that the best, if somebody is part of a community of faith, if somebody is part of a healthy neighborhood, if somebody's part of some social structure, that group of people, whether it's just your immediate family or your extended family or your neighborhood or your church community, whatever it is, the healing power in that group is just remarkable. And part of what we try to do is help the individuals in those groups, number one, like we talked about earlier, psychoeducation, learn about, you can learn about what happens to the body, what are predictable responses. You can teach people that, listen, you're going to be completely frickin' exhausted. You're going to think that you can go back to work after 6 weeks, but you're only going to be able to do about 25% of what you normally would do. And then you're going to start being hard on yourself, and your employers aren't going to understand it. So the more we can educate employers, we can educate the schools, we can educate the community members about what are the normal trajectories out of these experiences, so that people have, like at St. John's, there will be an impact on the ability of some kids to learn as efficiently as they did the year before. And so if you are aware of that and you pay attention to that, you can actually make the kinds of accommodations that help individual children kind of get through this in a better way. Exactly. But unfortunately, what we tend to do is that we tend to not understand these things. So we then compound the problem by having expectations of, you're just not cutting it at work, Tom. And you forget, oh yeah, 6 months ago your child drowned. Oh yeah, that's right. But you got to get this warehouse cleaned out. Somebody's got to do it. And so if we can educate the employers, if we can educate the schools, if we can educate the faith communities, I think there will be more opportunities for these understanding moments that are truly therapeutic, and the burden for formal therapy will drop. Right. And that's kind of what we need. That's what we have done in Turkey when there was this huge earthquake, and so we've done in a lot of other places where we're trying to help the mental health community understand that, listen, you have a role, but it's more as a conductor. You're not playing any of the instruments in the orchestra, but to make this therapeutic sort of music, somebody's got to play the trumpet, somebody's got to play the violin, somebody's got to play the drums at the right time. And you know about this stuff, so you get them all on the same page and you direct this. You're the conductor. You don't have to make all the music.
Yeah, and I love kind of twofold here, which is that, and that leads me to the next question and point is, what can communities do? And I love to hear that actually the greatest strength is going to come in communities, right? Churches, schools, groups getting together and being able to support as a group is such an impactful thing when people are going through this. I live in the Heights, and so all of our trees, right? We put blue ribbons for Greta, who was one of the little girls from the Heights who died at Camp Mystic. And it's just the little things you can do as a community to support the tragic loss that's happening, but also knowing that we all know that's not enough, right? That's a way to show we care, but we want to do more. And I've gotten so many questions from community leaders, school counselors, right? Leaders of like, what do we do now and what do we do next? And so I think for us to talk about what can schools do right now, I know, for example, St. John's Kincaid Memorial, Timber Grove, these places where there was loss, they are finding ways to come together, have prayer vigils, do community events, but it's summer, so it's a little bit more challenging and difficult, but what can they do now knowing that we will do more of these episodes to talk about what they should do next? And we all know that in the fall, when their classmates and their parents are returning to school with other kids in different settings, right, the needs will drastically change. But today, what can Gallery do? What can other business owners do? What can churches do? What can schools do?
Yep. So one of the big things that we've seen, and a lot of the feedback we've gotten from families impacted by things like this, is that communication is terrible. They don't feel like whether it's whatever organizations gathering the resources or whatever is available out there, they don't hear about it until later. And so we always recommend kind of making an impact map, a social impact map. Now, this obviously not everybody's going to do that, but if you are the head of a church, if you are involved in this at a school, you really need to make a social impact map, which is like, who was impacted in our school? Who is like plausibly going to be impacted, the parents, the relatives, the friends, the neighbors, and actually have some way to just be aware. Like if you don't know who is impacted, you're not going to have a clue about what to do. So the first thing is make people in positions, in organizations with a position of responsibility or authority, make a sort of a contact map. Now you can do that even if you have a group of friends, right? And you have 5, 6, 7, 8 friends, and somebody in that circle was impacted. You think about who is on my social impact map, and the littlest thing you can do is begin to communicate with them, whether it's through text or send them a card or just something. Begin communication and contact. And that's the first thing. The second thing is once you have an awareness of who in your sphere of influence has been impacted, then you educate yourself about what are some predictable things that we're going to run into. And that you can do that there's a variety of print materials and multimedia content that are available. We have some, and we can make some, talk about how to make some of them available. But there's content that's helpful if you are completely uneducated about mental health stuff. There's content that's helpful if you are in the mental health field. And so it's out there. It tends to not be particularly well organized necessarily, and sometimes it's very light touch content, which means that you're dealing with a specific complex thing like Mac just described, a really unique situation of a child orphaned by his parents suddenly and catastrophically being gone. That's very different than an intact family having a child who was in danger and saw their friends swept away. That's a different set of issues. And so part of the dilemma with the psychoeducational content is that when you write it, like you end up writing it sort of that's kind of generally helpful,
Right.
but it's not specifically helpful.
Right.
And so the benefit of this kind of podcast is that if people learn about what we're doing, over time, they will be able to have specific queries about what do I do in this situation? And we can have a conversation about a specific set of concrete things to do, which may end up, directing them to people in their community or people that can help them directly. But once you have the social contact map, who's impacted, reach out to them in little ways, mobilize the other people who will have concerns about them, and then think about, like, do they need meals? Do they need help cleaning up? Do they need, what are the concrete needs that they have? And then their emotional, social needs, mental health needs will become apparent over time. But in the beginning, it's very concrete stuff.
Okay. So stick more concrete, less emotional.
How would you
Yeah.
create a community event for right now that would at least show people that everybody was thinking and praying and caring for them?
Well, that's a good question. I'd have to give that a little bit of thought because I do think that, one of the things I've just off the top of my head is that I really think that maybe a community event for the helpers, not necessarily for the people that are being impacted yet. So even a community event about, all right, who wants to help? Because there's a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
And can we give them the level of specific sort of psychoeducation so they feel a little bit armed and they can actually utilize the available print and multimedia content a little bit better? That's what we would do as an organization. We'd kind of go, all right, listen, we would help the helpers, basically.
Right.
Um,
So my
and that's
next
kind of what,
question,
yeah.
yeah, another question I have that leads me to is what should we not be doing? I think a lot of us are wondering, like, what are things we shouldn't be doing right now? What are things what are statements or comments we should avoid? And people get so nervous, it becomes this analysis paralysis of like, I know I need to do something, but I don't know what to do, so I won't do anything at all.
Yeah, that's such a common phenomenon. Here's what you have to do. If you really want to help, you have to recognize that you're going to feel incredibly uncomfortable. Human beings are relational creatures, right? If you run into somebody who's like really enthusiastic, pretty soon you feel better. If you run into somebody who's really down and always negative, if you spend a lot of time with them, pretty soon you start to see the world in that way too. And so what I think we really need to do is recognize this relational contagion is so powerful, but what it does during traumatic events is that when somebody feels so much pain, I mean, you saw me start crying here almost twice on this podcast. You have to be able to tolerate that distress. Go back in. Just go back in. You have to don't go back to where you feel safe and comfortable and not distressed. It's uncomfortable. You have to recognize you're going to feel helpless. You're going to feel just like here I am. I'm like an expert in this, and I can guarantee you if I spent 10 minutes with one of these families, I'd feel completely helpless like a moron. But if I stay, there'll be a moment when they'll say something, and I'll go, yeah, it's pretty normal to be completely exhausted. You're going to feel very tired, and that's okay. And I can then start to go from something that I know and help them. But in the beginning, it's like it's such an emotional, how do you interact with a weeping parent who's trying to deal with the horror of their child dying? You got to stay. You got to be present. You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to feel incompetent. You're going to feel paralyzed. But if you stay, you'll start to see little openings where they can hear you, where they can accept a kind hug, where you can get them coffee. You'll find little ways. It's present, attentive, right? Wait, watch what's going on, listen, watch, and then be attuned. And then when you're attuned in that moment, you kind of go, all right, let me give you something, And then, that's what helps. And it's because of the discomfort of traumatic pain, that's part of what drives people away.
Yeah.
It's also part of what makes people want this family that's in pain to be resilient. We tend to use the term resilience to basically protect ourselves a lot, right? The reality is, in order for them to demonstrate resilience, they're going to have to go through all kinds of hell. And yes, maybe they'll demonstrate resilience, but that's going to wear down. Resilience is a capability that can be built up, and then it can be worn down. And I can guarantee you the most resilient family that you know, belongs to a community of faith, has extended family that's supporting them, has all kinds of economic resources. If they had a kid that drowned there, their resilience is going to get worn down, and in 6 months they're just going to be struggling. They'll struggle through the whole time, but it will be easy for us to say, oh, they're resilient. Look at that. You'll see stuff like, oh, she laughed at a joke. That doesn't mean she's healed from the trauma of her child drowning.
And how do people start to even think about like what to say when you can tell someone is struggling with guilt, right? Whatever that guilt might be. I mean, in particular, we know for Camp Mystic kids, the parents, they weren't there, but even other families and everything that's happening, there's going to be guilt, right?
Yeah.
We've heard stories about, one person survived, one didn't during this flooding event. And, so how do we start to, well, I mean, we can't process it for people, but how do people start to process and work through guilt? What can we do to help with that?
Yeah, that's one of those longer term sort of cognitive beliefs that gets stuck and is one of the most challenging parts of working with people and helping people who've had this kind of traumatic experience. And your brain part of what your brain does to kind of make sense out of stuff like this is you run through different scenarios. If I'd only done this, I shouldn't have done this, I didn't do that. He told me not to go there. She's too young. And you can get into these cognitive loops. And that's where therapy actually, Liz, the kind of stuff that actually Dr. McIngvale, the stuff that you do. Oh, we were doing pretty good here with first names. All right, Liz, I'll go back to Liz.
Thank you. But it is, and because from a trauma and CBT perspective, like I actually really do know how to treat that, right? We've done it with veterans, with PTSD, people who have experienced mass casualties, all right. But it's so much later. I don't know how to help people process it right now. I know how to do it when you're ready for treatment.
So here's what I'm going to, and again, this is part of that psychoeducational thing. So if you think about the brain, this upside down triangle brain, right? Top is a cortex. Guilt is a cognition.
Yeah.
Guilt is a cognition. Right now, they don't have any, they're so distressed that most of their cortex is kind of shut down and semi-unavailable. So you can say things and do things that will not contribute to guilt, right? But that has to be dealt with later on. And usually using the kinds of therapeutic tools and strengths that you have. It's a very challenging thing. And this is where some of the things that parents hear or that people try to say to comfort somebody actually contributes to guilt, right?
Yeah.
There are people who have I can't believe some of the horrible stuff I've seen on social media.
Oh.
It's astounding that in our country people would do that. But that's a whole different conversation. But there are people who have religious beliefs that they go, everything happens for, they're in a better place. That does not help necessarily. And in fact, for some people, making that statement fits into their own religious beliefs about what did I do wrong? How is what I did wrong in my life connected to this, event that took my child? And that kind of guilt is hard to deal with. So I'm a big fan of this. I think people need to remember that words in this moment are not going to be as powerful as just physical proximity.
Yeah. My dad's one of his favorite statements that he taught us growing up is words whisper, actions shout. And exactly. I think that's just so clear here, right? Is like you show up, your presence is going to mean a lot more than what you say. What you say, by the way, half the time when people are experiencing trauma isn't even heard, right?
Exactly.
They can't
even
be
process
heard.
it. Exactly. Yeah.
How about human beings were made to live, work, play, and die in groups? For a lot of those people, they were camping down on the river, and they were swept away. So they might not have a big group of some of the other ones to support them. How can you reach out and find those people and help them?
That's a really I think that's a great question. The related to that, Mac, is that there are a number of people who had children there who were not from Texas. And so the awareness and sort of the mobilization of social supports for these families that are in different parts of the country will not be as great as it is in Texas. So we found this after a number of sort of high-profile events where, for example, after the Sandy Hook shooting, several of those families moved out of state. And so they literally had, no benefit of all of the mobilization of supports and activities and things that were taking place in Connecticut. And they struggled. So this is kind of why that social contact map model is helpful. We always talk to, at some point, people that are involved in these camps and people that are involved in the formal governmental response should create social contact maps, like who is impacted by this, who are these people, where do they come from, these people were camping and the family lives in Oregon. We have to reach out to them, we have to communicate with them, but that tends to be poorly done. But that's part of what has to happen. There has to be an intentional effort to create a social contact map about who's directly impacted, who's secondary impacted, who's third degree impacted. And one of the, I have I guess it was just like a presentation that is on our YouTube channel that I created for colleagues in Turkey, where I talk about this phenomenon. It will, for those of you who are clinicians, it will have some relevance for your thinking about and your work with families impacted by this in Texas. And we can make sure that people get links to this. And then actually, if we do end up having as we have more of these, maybe we can have sort of a little bit of a presentation about some of these concepts for the clinical teams and responders.
We would love that. So one question I'm getting a lot, go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead, Liz.
I was just going to say one question I'm getting a lot is kind of twofold. It's from parents of their kids go to school with someone who was lost in the floods or family members impacted. And one of the big questions, that I'm hearing a lot is, how do I support my child, right? How do I have conversations about what happened to their friend? How do I help them process it? How are they going to show back up in the classroom? And also, when do I know or start to think about signs and symptoms are normal versus I need to get my kid their own clinician. I need to get them in therapy, right? And we know there were 750 kids camping at Mystic, right? Yes, there is a huge impact in that group of young campers that witnessed things firsthand, that experienced it. And as we've talked about, right, the impact of the flooding was not only limited to Mystic, it's tons of families, tons of individuals, right, 80 plus people. And so how do we have conversations with kids about what they're experiencing? How do we normalize that? But what can we be doing for them right now? Because I think one of my biggest concerns as a clinician is that it's summer. And I worry that these kids struggling are sitting at home alone. And a lot of them are not in communities and in school and in classrooms right now to have each other. So yeah, just curious what parents and caregivers can do and be looking out for.
We wrote a very brief kind of 10-point thing about talking to children about traumatic death.
Great.
And a lot of the key elements in that are things that would be helpful for parents and any adult talking to kids about something like this. And again, we can make it available. There's a very like a one-page version of it that's already being distributed in Kerrville Public Schools. And there are some a little bit more deeper detail in a couple of things, and we can make that available. But the real key is this: is to talk about it, focus on the developmental age of the child, make it clear to the child that you're not afraid to talk about this, that it's like you're not so overwhelmed about it that it's a secret or it's something that you can't talk about. But you don't have to go into great detail. just talk about it, and then invite the child to talk with you about it anytime they want to talk about it. And give them control over how they bring it up, and when they bring it up, how long they talk about it. Because part of what will happen is if, just like I said, I mean, I can only handle this for like 3 or 4 seconds before I'm like ready to break down. And I'm very distant from ground zero, so to speak. So children, when they talk about it or bring it up with a parent, usually what they'll do is they'll bring up a little bit of a fear or a thought or a question, and then the parent will be like, oh my God, I need to talk about it. They need to sort of vent. They need to do whatever. And we tend to sort of dig a little bit more, which makes them feel a little bit more uncomfortable. So the whole idea is kind of back to what I said earlier, is tiny little doses. It's knowledge and regulation and change in the brain happens with lots of tiny little doses. And so they'll have a question, answer the question, and they'll just kind of wander off. It's sort of like those of you who've ever dealt with kids and they're curious about sex, right? The 5, 6, 7-year-old child will come up and ask a question, and you're like, whoa, okay. So then you start this big elaborate explanation and they just walk away. Oh, okay. They didn't want the full explanation. They just kind of want, okay, that's a topic that gets mom and dad kind of stirred up, and that's interesting. And they walk off. So, and then they'll come back later and they'll get more elaboration and more elaboration. But that's not the time to give them the birds and the bees talk, when they're a little kid and they come up and they ask about a body part.
Right.
The same thing's going to happen with this. They'll come up and they'll ask about death, where do you go? What happens? And it'll be like a big question, but it doesn't need a big answer. And that's part of what you need to do is stay regulated, give them something to hang on to and to kind of mull around with, and they'll wander off, and then if they want more, they'll come back. Giving control of individuals to process this stuff is really powerful and important.
Could you give us a couple examples of people that are directly related to some of the people who lost their lives? How could, in these terrible moments, they stay regulated?
Well, that's a great question, Mac. I think that most people's brains will use dissociation to regulate themselves. And so what they'll do is that they'll have moments where it's just they're right in it and it's overwhelming, and then they'll sort of numb out. And so that'll happen, but that's physically exhausting. What I would recommend, and this is really important, if you want to manage this, you've got to really focus on physical activity, sleep, diet, socialization. 4 things. And these are things you can control, but you have to think about them like they're prescribed. Just like take your vitamin in the morning, take your 10-minute walk. Lunch, eat at the same time. Just the more external regulation you get, even kind of rigid, the more your body will be regulated. And that's one of the best ways to start, is to use doses of movement, whether it's riding a bike or swimming or listening to music, whatever makes you feel good. You've got to take these tiny little breaks. And sleep is sometimes hard to deal with. But try to go to sleep. If you can't go to sleep, get up, do something productive. Try to do your same little sleep routine again. Doesn't work.
Yeah,
Get up
and I
do
think
something.
as a anxiety clinician, and one big thing would be, if you find yourself in this rumination, right, be thoughtful about what you're doing that may be promoting it, and can you change and do something different. One thing we really talk a lot about also, and I think this is so important with kids, right, that are experiencing this kind of secondhand trauma, survivor's guilt, all the things, is be cautious about exposure to news and media. Because, one
Absolutely.
thing I learned a lot from you, Bruce, is that, children, when they hear about something, it's as if they can sometimes believe as if it's happening all over again. It's hard for them to understand that this is a replay of a past event. And
Yeah.
so we need to be thoughtful about that for kids, but also for ourselves, right? The more we are sitting here searching on social media, looking all day, reading news stories, right, the more dysregulated we become. And that is something we can behaviorally change, right? We can limit our own exposure to this repeated trauma.
Exactly. And studies have shown that if you expose children to like the Challenger disaster, for example, children who watch that news cycle more than 10 times actually develop trauma-related symptoms at the same rate as kids that actually witnessed it. And so this is something that you're spot on, that's so important, that the more people expose themselves to repetitive negative things, the more that's going to have an impact on you. So it is, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that really is, I think, the number one controllable thing that you can do for children and for yourself is to stop watching and scrolling relentlessly.
Last two questions I have for today, and then we have so many more to come, and I'm so excited to continue this series and provide support in the long run because that's what we're here for. How do we help and support our first responders right now? They have been everywhere, their boots on the ground, and my gut from what we've talked about is like bring them a meal, right? Help them get to showers or different things that we can do to get them in a pattern and in a routine, but we know they've got a long road ahead as well.
They have a long road ahead, and it's interesting, a lot of the people who choose to go into first responding positions also tend to be kind of not necessarily um, good at taking help. They're very good at giving help, but they're not usually that comfortable letting people take care of them. Now, over time, people are learning more about this and getting better. But what I would recommend is you just have to think about them in almost the same way as you think about people that are at ground zero, is that they need relational regulation. They need to know that you are aware of them and you value them. They need these concrete things like, hey, you got to focus on your sleep. You know, you've got to rotate out. You've got to take some time for yourself. You've got to meet the needs of your family. Do not make the mistake of compounding this tragedy by wearing yourself out and having this echo impact on everybody in your life. And again, education can help support that. The more people learn about that, the more they understand why you're saying that. If they understand, a lot of people don't like to be told what to do. And first responders, typically, cops, and they don't like to be told what to do, particularly by mental health people.
Right.
But if you tell them about the biology of responding and about what happens in the stress response systems, they're much more likely to recognize that, yeah, I guess that's probably good for me. But that's
And
a
I'm
big hurdle
hopeful
sometimes.
we can push this and have some impact. I know you've done a lot of work and research on what policymakers need to do and how they need to show up in these sort of events. And so would love to hear any feedback and ways we can push our local policy and of course national and statewide policymakers to really help show up in a way that's going to be most beneficial right now.
Yeah, I think that there will be, people will show up in the short term, right? Cameras, they'll show up. A disaster, they'll show up. I think the heartbreaking thing is in 6 months, when the pain and agony and misery and the delayed response of building and rebuilding, they're not going to show up. Because you know why? What they'll be met with is anger. And the slowness of the responses and what happened, just that's when they'll not show up. But again, it's the same thing as, honestly, if you are a policymaker and you have the guts to show up and tolerate the discomfort of what happens in recovery, you're going to be better. You're going to help your constituency better. You will be valued more by the people that vote for you. Do the right thing.
That's right. Final words and thoughts for today from everybody. Would love to hear that. And our commitment to our community is to help show up and serve in the long run, not the short run. And so, Bruce, I just want to say thank you. The fact that I could text you yesterday and you could say, I'll show up anytime tomorrow, you tell me when, and you're here and offering your expertise that is grounded by research, by impact, and of course, by the way you've shown up for countless tragedies is something we're just so grateful for.
Absolutely. Bruce, what would a 30-second commercial talking to people affected, just to let them know that everybody cares about them, what would it sound like?
Oh, wow. Mac, you're talking to the wrong guy. I don't do sound bites very well, as you probably could tell from this podcast. I do. You know what? I think it would be somebody like you. I think it should be you, a public figure who's revered, to just speak from the heart. You know, let people know that you care. That you're not going to go away. You're going to put together supports and resources to help people. And as we figure out what that's going to look like, we're going to make sure that you learn about it.
Sounds great to me. It's an honor being here with you and Liz.
Hey, you got quite a daughter there, Mac. She's pretty special.
She takes after her mother, thank God.
Well, thank y'all for being here. I know that so many people who are watching and listening are struggling and suffering right now. And the thing we heard countless times today is that this is going to be uncomfortable. This is going to be really hard. And we need to all show up and keep showing up, because it is what we can do to help someone else move through this. Try to get people and encourage people to be in a routine, right? Eating meals, doing a little bit of movement, engaging in their normal activities, despite how abnormal everything else is, and stick with it for the long run, right? Communities, schools, loved ones, family members, clinicians, we can all show up right now, and that's critical. But what's really going to be critical is how we're showing up in 1, 2, 3, 6, 12 months.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Looking forward to many more and ways we can keep helping. And we will, of course, link and share all of the resources we talked about today.
Great. My pleasure. Great to see you too. Keep up the good work, you guys.
You got it. Thank you.